Hey, everybody, welcome back to another Motivation Monday podcast for Monday, March 4th, 2019. Hope you had a great weekend and hope you're ready to get this week going. We've got a great episode for you this week. This one is actually a listener question. So I got a Patreon message from one of our Patreon members, Valerie. Shout out to Valerie for the question and for being a Patreon member. And they asked a great question. This is a question that I think a lot of us have. And it's about whether the chords you are reading from whatever particular lead sheet you're using to learn a tune are correct. And this is a really good question because there's so many different sources that we get our lead sheets from. I mean, think about just the fact that there are so many real books out there. Never mind now with the internet where maybe you're trying to find a tune and you can't find it anywhere. So you basically just do a Google search for a PDF out there and you find one and you have to go off that because you can't find anything else. How the heck do you know that those chords are accurate? And the short answer is that you don't, unless you transcribe the original tune from the recording that you are trying to emulate or from the sort of accepted historical recording that everybody learns off of. So let me read the question to you. So, hi Nick, I have a question. I have started to try and memorize the chords of a particular jazz standard, Petite Fleur for that matter. I see now that when I look up the chords, I find versions that differ from each other. In some cases, I guess it doesn't matter too much. Like one version, there's a C minor 7 chord, where in another, it's just a regular C minor. But then sometimes it is a totally different chord, G minor instead of D7. Does this mean that I have just found a badly copied chord sheet, or is that a legitimate fact? What would those differences result in when players meet at a jam session and play according to different chords? Thank you very much in advance if you can help. Well, yeah, I mean, there's the two things that you have mentioned are two very, very different things. So things like in one version there being a C minor 7 chord, and in another version it just sang C minor without the 7, those are very, very minor differences. And that honestly is not going to mess you up that badly, right? We see stuff like that all the time. Like somebody plays a C6 chord and then another person plays a C major 7 chord, whereas somebody else might just be playing a C major triad. And those are like small differences in the way that we hear certain tunes or the way that we like to play them. And you'll hear versions of jazz standards with all kinds of different chords in it. But the second example is much more glaring, and that can provide for some serious problems. So let's go back to that G minor versus D7 example. That's huge. One of them is the 1 chord, presumably, and the other one is the 5 chord. So if somebody's playing a 5 chord while they're supposed to be playing a 1 chord, that can result in some seriously bad sounding clashes between the musicians in the band. So that one to me is much more problematic. So this goes to something that I talk about sometimes on this podcast about the way to memorize and learn tunes. So the first facet of this that I think that would help you a lot, Valerie, is to sit down with the recording and whatever chords you have and see if they match up to what you're hearing, right? So in this case, find a recording of Petite Fleur and listen to it. See if you can hear those chords going by. Because I would venture a guess that most of you out there can hear the difference between a 5 chord and a 1 chord. Even if you don't think you can, I bet that you actually can hear the difference between those two chords. After all, 5 pulling to 1 is one of the major things that we hear in music all the time. So that would be my first suggestion. Use your ears off of whatever recording you want your band to sound like and see if you can match them up from your ears to what's on the paper. And then if what's on the paper is totally wrong, you'll know by listening to it. That would be the first thing. Now, the second thing would be that I always try to think about the structure of a tune instead of the individual chords, right? So if you see a G minor chord in one lead sheet, and that's maybe like at the beginning of a 4-bar phrase, and in another lead sheet, you see a D7 in that same measure, well, I'm going to go ahead and say that logically, the 1 chord is usually going to start a phrase in most tunes. Of course, there are big exceptions when I'm talking about this, but I'm going to go ahead and say that the 1 chord probably fits at the beginning of a phrase more than the 5 chord. So there are certain things that you can deduce just by looking at something in a logical fashion, right? Now, the other thing you could do is you could sit down and you could plunk these chords out on a piano using just really simple voicings, 1, 3, and 7, or sometimes even 1 and 3 will work, and just see if the chord progression that's written on whatever lead sheet you have makes sense to your ears. One other tip is that you can also listen to the chords that are printed on the sheet against the melody. Because sometimes what will happen is the melody will clash really, really hard with the chords that are written on the lead sheet. And then you know that the chords on that particular sheet might not be accurate. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to help you with maybe a not so well written out piece of music or lead sheet that you're using. Those 4 strategies, listening to it, thinking about logically the phrase structure, thinking about the structure of the overall tune, like instead of learning it by rote memorization, actually thinking about the chord movement that can clue you into whether something is correct or incorrect. And then also trying to match up what chords are written with the melody, assuming that the melody is accurate on whatever sheet you're using. I think if you think about those 4 things, you could probably answer this question when it comes up pretty reliably most of the time by thinking about those different facets. Now, as far as going to a jam session and playing it with other people, it's kind of a crapshoot. You know what I mean? You hope that everybody that's at the jam session, especially people that are in the rhythm section, have a good handle on the jazz standard repertoire and are going to be playing, somewhat the same thing. And again, this always depends on what rhythm section you're playing with and what jam session you're at, but you kind of just have to hope for it. The other thing that you can do, and this might sound funny, but it would actually work, is bring a couple of copies of whatever chords that you are actually playing over whatever tune this might be and hand them out. I mean, it wouldn't be too weird of a thing to do, especially if it's a lesser known tune that's not quote unquote part of the jazz standard repertoire that there's any chance the rhythm section might not know or the other musicians on stage. There's nothing wrong with bringing in your own sheet and handing it out. In fact, a lot of the rhythm section members will be really grateful to you if they don't know that tune and all of a sudden they have a chord sheet in front of them. So that might be another strategy you can use to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So I hope that this helps, and I know that this is a huge problem because obviously when you're on the internet, you can't just trust anything that you come across on anybody's website. So you've got to sometimes connect the dots yourself, and that can be kind of tricky. But it's just something that we face in our modern music making lives this day and age. So hopefully that helps. If we want to talk about this, let's have a discussion about it. If anybody else has any other tips or tricks about how to handle this same question, let's talk about it in our community Facebook group. So 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. I would love to have a discussion about this because I'm sure it's something that has not only come up for Valerie, but for a lot of other people that listen to the show as well. All right. We will see you on Friday with another episode. Have a great week, everybody, and stay inspired. Talk to you soon. Bye.